Gentleman yields back. Well done. The gentleman from South Carolina is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Here's what I think is abundantly clear. The Democrats will do and are doing everything in their power to keep President Trump off the ballot or from winning. Nothing is off the table. Things I'd never imagined or even thought were remotely possible are now happening in the United States of America. You name it, and they're doing it. They're taking the decision away from voters by outright stripping his name off the ballot. Of course, the Supreme Court rightfully intervened there, but you had unelected secretaries of state, unaccountable judges making these decisions. They spied on his campaign, as we've talked about. They abused FISA, fabricated documents, and relied on a paid-for campaign dossier to spy on his campaign. Again, falsely alleging that there was some Russian collusion, which has been debunked over and over again. And the most egregious yet, we have not one, not two, or three, but 4 politically motivated cases that are happening all around the country. Again, it's to keep him off the campaign trail, it's to smear his reputation, and it's to drain him of resources. This is a targeted, this is a meticulous effort and a plan of attack to usurp the will of the people. Again, at the expense of our own institutions. That's what's most troubling to me as a lawyer, is that we're using Article 1 to attack him. We're using Article 2 to attack him, and now we're using the courts. These local prosecutors should be focused on cleaning up their streets, cleaning up their communities, stopping people from getting shot on the subways, and prosecuting real crimes, for goodness sakes. But we don't have that here. We have Donald Trump, right? Let's go after him. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to enter into the record an article by America First Policy Institute called "Progressive Prosecutors Abusing Their Power."
Without objection.
You know, in Georgia, Fani Willis brought charges against President Trump immediately when he announced his reelection. I guess there's so much bandwidth in her jurisdiction that she can take taxpayer-funneled vacations with her lover and ignore real crime that is happening because there's just not much to do in Georgia, but that kind of belies the case. We have, she oversees, quite frankly, according to this article, a top 5 Georgia crime capital with a rate of 30.5 crimes per 100,000 residents. In 2022, larceny was the highest offense in Fulton County with 19,509 thefts recorded. Alvin Bragg waited 5 years to criminally indict President Trump on 34 counts of falsifying business records. And again, going around the statute of limitations to create some weird, nuanced, and novel way to prosecute an alleged crime. Not to mention he hired the former number 3 official in Biden's DOJ who has been paid for by the DNC to be a top prosecutor of the case. Meanwhile, during Bragg's first year as DA, data showed that conviction rate, Mr. Costello, you would probably know this, of only 51% for serious felony charges. That's not really good, is it? A conviction rate at 51%?
That's awful.
And misdemeanor convictions went from 53% down to 28%. I mean, I would think that would be like a fireable offense if I was electing somebody to be my prosecutor.
That's true, and the governor of New York could do that, but she hasn't.
You know, our rule of law, I think, needs to be restored, and I'm deeply troubled by the ways in which Democrats are attacking the institutions of our country, and of course, our former president of the United States, who is now running and is the lead candidate and the presumptive nominee for the Republican Party. I introduced this Congress the No More Political Prosecutions Act, which would allow someone like President Trump to remove his case in state court to a federal court at his discretion if he wanted to. Why might that be important, Mr. Trustee?
Well, I think as we're seeing play out in front of us, there's political bias that's demonstrated before people are even in office, and a desire to carry the torch against President Trump in this case, maybe get a few visits to the White House along the way. And ultimately, it's the genie getting out of the bottle. I mean, the reason why that, and I haven't studied your legislation, but the reason that concept makes sense to me is because maybe it is the tip of the spear, but there's a whole spear behind the tip. And the very people that are okay with politicized DOJ may be feeling very differently 5, 10, 30, 60 years from now. I think we're at that pivotal moment where we have to take action to reform the lawfare that's taking place around us.
Right, in the case of Alvin Bragg, right, he campaigned on going against President Trump, is that correct?
That's my understanding.
And in fact, I think one of our colleagues on this committee, Mr. Goldman, fundraised for him in that effort. And so now we have a case that apparently, again, there's no crime in the District of Manhattan, and we're going after President Trump. Why would jury pools be a reason why this legislation might be important? The jury pool in Manhattan as opposed to a federal court. What are the differences, and why might that be attractive to somebody who has served our country as president or vice president?
Well, it's a wider net when you have a federal jury pool in terms of who the base of folks are. And what you're looking for is not a perfect microcosm of the United States at any given moment. There's, I've tried cases where we had people from the eastern shore of Maryland and the western parts of Maryland, and then all points in between. So you get all sorts of different philosophies and backgrounds. That's understood. But
And
when you
oftentimes,
have,
and I'm limited to the last question though, oftentimes too, the voir dire process in federal court is much more robust than state court. Might that be attractive to somebody who's served as president?
yeah, it tends to be a pretty rigorous process. I've had death penalty prosecutions where weeks were spent picking a jury. High-profile defendants are going to have probably more protection, general rule, but more protection going through the voir dire process in a federal case.
Thank you, Mr. Trustee. Mr. Chairman, I yield.